The University of Missouri's College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources, or CAFNR, is a national leader in agricultural development. Through numerous programs of distinction, their research improves the health of people, animals, environments, and more, shaping the next generation of ag and natural resource leaders and making discoveries that impact not just our country, but the entire world. I'm Rachael Norden, and in this series of Thinking Out Loud, I sat down with the directors of these programs to shine a light on these unsung heroes of agriculture and bring their research to you. This episode, we hear from Dr. Patrick Westhoff, director of CAFNR's Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute, or FAPRI, to talk about his decades-long international career, how FAPRI's work provides vital information for farming legislation and policymakers worldwide, and how those policies impact us every single day. Dr. Westhoff, welcome. Thank you for being here today. Now, while you've been at FAPRI-MU since 1996, you've had an outstanding life and career over the decades that began on a dairy and hog farm in Manchester, Iowa, and expanded all the way out to Latin America, Europe, Southern Africa, and more before landing you here in Columbia at Mizzou. So before we get into the meat of FAPRI and its work, tell me more about you and the background you bring to the table as its director.
Yes, I grew up on this dairy and hog farm. My parents had this farm from 1964 on. We milked 70 cows and had about 400 hogs on the farm. Had corn, oats, and hay that we grew. Summers were spent, doing work outside pretty much every summer all the way through college. When I came to University of Missouri, was to work on a project that was getting started in Ireland and the United Kingdom. So there was money because of the peace process in Northern Ireland at the time. To try to have cross-border policy programs in place. So that's what brought me here. I spent a lot of time in Ireland, United Kingdom as a result, and some colleagues of mine are still involved in that project, 20-some years later. Likewise, else through up that project in Ireland and the United Kingdom, expanded to work across most of the continent. I was just back in Brussels a few weeks ago, had a chance to meet old friends from the European Commission and elsewhere from that I first got to know 25 years ago. We've done some work in Africa, and mostly in Southern Africa. But I've had trips to Morocco, Tunisia, and some other countries as well. In Southern Africa, there was a graduate student came here a long, long time ago, and one thing led to another. And next thing we know, they have an institute sort of like FAPRI that they've got going now in Southern Africa that's expanded its work to include everything as far north as Uganda and as far west as Congo, so a big chunk of the continent. And they've got more employees than we have now, so it's something I'm very proud of over the years.
Wow, that's amazing. To have that kind of worldwide influence in one's career certainly must feel very empowering and even humbling. So you've also done work here domestically, though, in the U.S., namely not just your work at Mizzou, but also on Capitol Hill, on the Senate Committee of Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry from 1992 to 96. A committee that's still strong today, doing a ton of work in the sector in areas such as legislation around the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, currently, something FAPRI is also working on, as we'll touch on later in this interview. So sort of the same question here. Could you touch on your time in the committee and how it translates to your work at FAPRI?
So I got that job in part because my predecessor was someone I'd worked with before. And I went there, and I remember one of my job interview for the job was asked lots of questions about economics. The guy who was interviewing me was an economist himself, and I was doing that part okay. Then came the most important question. He said he saw that I was from a dairy farm. I was going to be working for a senator from Vermont, where dairy farming is very, very important. And he said, well, how many cows did you milk? And I had the right answer, which was 70, because he was from a farm with 100 cows, and he wanted to say he milked more cows than anybody else on staff. But it was a great experience over the years. I had a chance to work on major pieces of legislation, from farm bills to trade agreements to budget bills. So I got a chance to see how the world works, and the work we do today is still connected to that work I did back in the time I was on the Hill.
Backing up just a bit on our timeline here, prior to your time on the committee, during your international travels, you spent a few years in Guatemala, 1979 to 81, during which time the Guatemalan Civil War was really starting to heat up. Now, without getting to specifics, those war times are very similar to what we're seeing in the Middle East and places like Gaza today. So could you tell me more about your experiences in Guatemala and how or if they've influenced the work that you lead today with FAPRI?
No, very definitely. It's had a big influence on my entire life. When I went to Peace Corps, I'd never been on an airplane before. So flying to Guatemala was my first time ever leaving the Midwest. Yeah, so it was quite the experience for me. I worked in the southeast part of the country. At the time I was there, that was a relatively calm part of the country compared to other parts of the country. But there were nevertheless problems. And after I left, things got bad, even in the part of the country where I was working. It gave me a chance to see the other side. You know, I grew up in agriculture, so I knew a lot about U.S. agriculture. But seeing how people live when they have a couple of acres instead of a couple hundred acres, you know, seeing all the struggles that people had to deal with on a daily basis, and realizing that, you know, some things that we see as a major challenge are really nothing compared to the challenges that those people face. So when I came back, I wanted to do something related to development, related to policy, and things evolved over the years, but I ended up in doing agricultural policy work in the United States and around the world.
Now, according to your website, FAPRI, quote, provides analysis of agricultural markets and policies for use by policymakers and the public. It develops 10-year projections of the farm economy and considers how changes in policy and external events affect everything from corn to consumer food prices and the budgetary cost of farm programs, which is a lot of words folks like me probably don't fully grasp the meaning of. So in layman terms, could you break down for me exactly what that means?
So these projections are used by farmers and used by businessmen, used by policymakers in trying to make choices about what crops to plant, what policies to pursue, other investment decisions that people have to make about what's likely to happen in the future given what we think we know today. We don't have a crystal ball, and I don't pretend to know what the future is going to be. I've been doing this long enough to know that I better either have a good sense of humor or a very short memory, because obviously our baseline projection will never come out in practice. But what we like to do is give people a starting point for discussions, and we come back and look at what happens if something changes. Now, let's suppose we have a change in policy. What does that mean for farmers? What's it mean for consumers? What's it mean for taxpayers? If we have a change in the weather, what's that going to mean for everybody involved in the sector? So some of the reasons we've got the system in place to do these projections looking forward. We found it's useful for policymakers to have something to look at to evaluate not just the shouting matches that we tend to have in politics, but actually put some numbers to things so they can say, okay, here's the trade-offs involved in making the choices we have to make.
So why 10 years? Is there a specific reason for that window?
Sure. So again, it is 10 years for a variety of reasons, one of which is budgetary reasons in D.C. When they analyze legislation for consideration, for example, the current budget debate, they estimate budgetary costs over the next 10 years. So to estimate budgetary costs of farm programs, you need to have projections for the next 10 years for what might look like for that sector. Also, it's just a nice, convenient round number. We've done some work, of course, looking at longer-term issues related to climate change and the like, where 10 years isn't nearly enough. Other times, focusing on the day and tomorrow is what people won't really care about.
Gotcha. So also on FAPRI's website, on the About page, there's a video, and according to this video, FAPRI was founded in 1984 after, and you're quoted as saying, there was a concern that USDA, or the United States Department of Agriculture, was not able or willing to provide objective information to Congress in the 1980s, and that you believed a lot of those concerns have gone away over the years. Now, as of today, June 2025, that video was posted 11 months ago, filmed even before then, which would put its inception and publication well into the Biden administration. And of course, FAPRI doesn't take sides, doesn't make recommendations, but given our current congressional and federal climate and the challenges and cuts facing federal programs like the USDA, do you still feel that way? That those concerns have gone away, or do you feel they might be coming back a little bit?
I think people are always concerned about whether they're getting straight information from folks in D.C. and elsewhere. And so having an independent voice that's going to provide our own view of the world is a valuable thing that we can contribute to the process. I do think a lot of people who are trying to do the analysis are doing the best job they can in circumstances. And I think a lot of the information they provide is very good, but having an independent voice is good as well. I've been very proud of the fact that over the last couple of years during debate about farm legislation and like, we've gotten requests from Democrats and Republicans from House and Senate and the administration to do analysis that people are finding useful. To me, that says we must be doing something right if different folks are finding what we do to be helpful to the process.
Also in that video, Julian Binfield, FAPRI's Director of International Programs, is quoted as saying, international markets are becoming more important as a destination for U.S. products. So as tariff policy increases, can you highlight for me exactly what has made it grow increasingly important over the years, and how or if or what current policies influence these markets, tariff or otherwise?
So lots happened, of course, and there's a lot in that question.
Yes.
Let's get a few pieces of it. So yes, U.S. agriculture is very dependent on exports of the products that farmers produce, and of course they face competition from imports sometimes as well. Here in the state of Missouri, if you think about the 5 major things that account for most of the sales of farmers in the state, you've got corn, soybeans, cattle, hogs, and chickens. Okay, we export beef, we export pork, we export chicken, we export corn, and we export soybeans in significant quantities. So what happens is international markets have a lot to do with what the welfare is of a farmer here in the state of Missouri, and of course nationwide as well. If you think about the current situation, the tariffs, of course, have raised lots of questions about where we're going forward. There's lots of concerns about retaliatory policies that might be put in place by other countries and what that might mean to our ability to export U.S. agricultural products. We've already seen some concerns, especially on the meat export side, that because of tariffs put in place by China in particular, we haven't exported as much meat as we normally would to China and elsewhere. And concerns, of course, get to be much more severe depending on what happens as the tariff policies evolve in the weeks and months to come, what this will mean for farmers and others. So one thing we had to do back in the 2018 and 19 period when the last trade dispute with China was occurring was do some estimates on what this actually meant for commodity prices and for farm income and the like. And we provided that information to USDA, and they took that into account as they were trying to decide what sort of compensation might be appropriate to provide to farmers. So likewise, the Secretary of Agriculture has indicated that if the trade disputes result in negative consequences for farmers, they're going to be ready to step in again and provide some support. We could provide some estimates how much might be required to try to offset some of the negative effects that there might be. On the other side of things, of course, if you were to get new trade agreements, those might result in some new opportunities for U.S. to sell products abroad and change the rules of the game in many ways. That could be very important in the sector as well. And having systems in place to be able to estimate what those impacts are could be helpful to the process.
Of course, all the work that FAPRI does is incredibly important to creating these accurate and objective statistics that go toward these farming legislations. But can you highlight for me something FAPRI is working on right now, its importance, and how it could affect that legislation?
So we've been looking at some of the budget questions that have been coming up recently. The House passed a package of changes in legislation affecting farmers and a variety of other programs as well, including the SNAP program that provides assistance to low-income families in this country. So we've done some analysis looking at the farm portion of that picture. What would that do to farmers' income? What would it do to cost of farm programs, et cetera? And we've shared that information with people in Washington. We think that's helpful to help people understand what the consequences are of those choices that are being made right now. What will actually happen, of course, that's a different question entirely, but it's one that's got a lot of attention. We've also done some work on biofuels in recent weeks, looking at how some changes in biofuel policy might affect not just farmers, but also consumers of fuel and everybody else involved in the supply chain, including consumers, ultimately, what they pay for food.
FAPRI prides itself on its baseline, its integrity as an objective, independent source for these statistics and information. So being founded by universities jointly by MU and Iowa State, and still being directly attached to them today, how does FAPRI maintain such a level of independence while under the influence of public university? Meaning, have proposed cuts to higher education affected FAPRI's operational bottom line?
Sure. At this point, our funding has not been cut in any way. So we have been quite relieved, so frankly, that so far we seem to be getting through the current situation without any direct hits on our operations. We've been very fortunate here at the University of Missouri is that people here recognize that what we do is kind of unique. We don't, we're not a typical academic unit. Our ties and work with policymakers means we have to be very attuned to what people care about and need to know in Washington in particular. So I always say, I'm happy that MU's let us be a bit weird sometimes. We're not your typical academics, and we can only thrive by having an environment that lets us do those things that are a bit out of the ordinary.
Well, Dr. Westhoff, this has been great. Thank you for all your time and discussion today. Closing out, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, I'm thank you again for the opportunity today. It's been a lot of fun. I'm nearing the end of my career. I'm actually looking to retire at the end of this year. And so the process has begun to try to pick the next person who will take charge of this institution and carry it forward. So I'm very happy to make sure I get out of the way before people say, does he still work here? And so I'm happy that we've been able to do what we've done over the years, and very hopeful that the future will bring more of the same.
Well, congratulations. I can tell just in the research and the short time we've had together, you've had a very long, impactful career, and it's a well-deserved retirement. So on behalf of us all, thank you. That was Dr. Patrick Westhoff, director of CAFNR's Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute. For now, before we send him off to enjoy his well-earned retirement, Dr. Westhoff will be staying with his family here in Columbia and plans to continue supporting FAPRI MU and its mission. If you would like to support FAPRI's work or learn more about what they do, visit fapri.missouri.edu. I'm Rachael Norden, and you've been listening to Thinking Out Loud from KBIA 91.3 FM.